You're exhausted from trying so hard. You push for outcomes, control situations and grip tightly to your plans, yet life keeps feeling like an uphill battle. What if the problem isn't that life is difficult? What if the problem is that you're fighting it? When you stop forcing life and start allowing it to unfold naturally, everything changes. Your stress decreases, better opportunities appear, and relationships improve. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your goals. It's about discovering that working with life's natural flow is far more effective than fighting against it. The exhaustion of constant force. Think about the last time you tried to force something to happen. Maybe you pushed for a promotion that wasn't ready to come, or you tried to make someone love you who wasn't interested. Remember how exhausting it felt? That's because forcing goes against the natural rhythm of how things actually work. When you force, you're essentially telling the universe that you know better than it does. You're gripping so tightly to your vision of how things should be that you miss how things actually are. This creates a constant state of tension in your body and mind. Your shoulders stay tight, your jaw clenches, and you live in a perpetual state of almost there without ever actually arriving. The psychology behind this is fascinating. When you're in a state of forcing, your nervous system stays activated in what's called the sympathetic state, your fight or flight response. This was great when humans needed to outrun predators, but it's terrible for making good decisions, being creative, or connecting with others. You literally cannot access your best thinking when you're in force mode. What forcing actually looks like. You might not even realize how much you're forcing in your daily life. Forcing shows up in subtle ways that feel normal because everyone around you is doing it too. You force yourself to stay in conversations that drain you because you think you should be social. You force yourself to eat when you're not hungry because it's time to eat. You force yourself to be happy when you're sad because you believe negative emotions are wrong. In relationships, forcing looks like trying to change someone into who you want them to be instead of loving who they are. You force conversations to go deeper before the other person is ready. You force yourself to forgive before you've actually processed your hurt. You force chemistry that isn't there because you think this person should be right for you. At work, you force yourself to care about projects that don't inspire you. You force yourself to network with people you don't like because you think it will help your career. You force creative solutions instead of allowing space for inspiration to strike naturally. With your health, you force yourself through workout routines you hate instead of ascending movement that brings you joy. You force yourself to eat foods that are good for you, even when they make you feel terrible. You force yourself to sleep when you're not tired and stay awake when you're exhausted. The illusion of control. The reason you force so much is because you believe it gives you control. But here's the thing. Most of what happens in your life is actually outside your control. You can't control other people's reactions, the weather, the stock market, or whether your flight gets delayed. You can't control whether you get sick, whether your boss is in a good mood, or whether your favorite restaurant is crowded when you arrive. What you can control is much smaller than you think. Your responses, your choices, your attention, and your actions. That's it. Everything else is just life happening. And when you try to control what's uncontrollable, you waste enormous amounts of energy. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring about outcomes. It means you learn to put your energy into what you can actually influence, while staying open to how things unfold. You plant seeds and tend to them, but you don't try to force the flowers to bloom faster. The art of allowing. Allowing is not the same as giving up. When you allow, you're still engaged and active. but you're working with the natural flow of things instead of against it. You're like a skilled surfer who reads the waves and uses their power instead of trying to fight them. Allowing means you pay attention to what's actually happening instead of what you think should be happening. If you're in a conversation and it naturally wants to go in a different direction than you planned, you let it. If your body is tired, you rest instead of pushing through. If an opportunity feels forced, you let it pass and trust that the right one will come. This requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of seeing the unknown as something to be controlled, you start to see it as a space of possibility. You begin to trust that life has its own intelligence and that you don't need to micromanage every detail. When relationships stop being forced, your relationships transform dramatically when you stop forcing them. Instead of trying to make people like you, you focus on being genuinely yourself and let the right people be drawn to that authenticity. Instead of forcing conversations, you become comfortable with silence and allow communication to flow naturally. You stop trying to fix people or convince them to see things your way. You offer your perspective when asked, but you don't attach your peace of mind to whether they take your advice. You love people for who they are right now, not for who they could become if only they would change. This doesn't mean you accept poor treatment or lower your standards. It means you recognize that trying to change someone else is both impossible and exhausting. You focus on being the kind of person you want to be and attract relationships that match that energy. When you stop forcing in relationships, you also stop forcing yourself to be someone you're not. You don't pretend to like things you don't like or agree with opinions you don't share. You become honest about your needs and boundaries, which actually makes you more attractive to the right people. Career and creativity without force. Your work life becomes infinitely more satisfying when you stop forcing it. Instead of pushing yourself into a career that looks good on paper but drains your soul, you start paying attention to what actually energizes you. You notice which tasks make time fly by and which ones make you watch the clock. This doesn't mean you quit your job tomorrow and become a street artist. It means you start making small adjustments that align your work more closely with your natural interests and strengths. You volunteer for projects that excite you and politely decline ones that don't when possible. You look for ways to use your unique talents instead of trying to be good at everything. In creative endeavors, the difference between forcing and allowing is night and day. When you force creativity, you sit at your desk and demand that inspiration strike. You get frustrated when the words don't come, or when your paintings don't match your vision. When you allow creativity, you create conditions that invite inspiration. You take walks, you read books that interest you, you have conversations that spark ideas. You also stop forcing yourself to be creative in ways that don't suit you. If you're not a morning person, you don't force yourself to write at 5 a.m. just because that's what some successful author does. You find your own rhythm and honor it. Health and body. Wisdom. Your body has incredible wisdom that you can only access when you stop forcing it to behave a certain way. When you stop forcing yourself to eat at prescribed times and start eating when you're actually hungry, you naturally begin to eat the right amounts. When you stop forcing exercise routines you hate and start moving in ways that feel good, you actually want to be active. Your body knows when it needs rest, when it needs movement, when it needs certain foods, and when it needs social connection or solitude. But you can only hear these signals when you stop drowning them out with shoulds and supposed-tos. This is where the concept of intuitive living comes in. Instead of following rigid rules about what you should eat, when you should sleep, and how you should exercise, you start tuning into your body's actual needs. You eat when you're hungry and stop when you're satisfied. You sleep when you're tired and wake up when you're rested. You move when you feel like moving and rest when you need to rest. The nervous system science. There's real science behind why stopping the force creates such dramatic changes in your life. When you're constantly pushing and forcing, your nervous system stays in a state of chronic activation. This floods your body with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which are meant to be short-term survival chemicals, not a way of life. When your nervous system is chronically activated, several things happen that make life harder. Your digestion shuts down, so you can't process food properly. Your immune system weakens, making you more susceptible to illness. Your creativity and problem-solving abilities decrease because your brain is focused on survival rather than innovation. Your relationships suffer because you can't connect authentically when you're in survival mode. You become reactive instead of responsive, taking things personally that aren't actually about you. You lose access to empathy and compassion because these are luxuries your nervous system can't afford when it thinks you're in danger. When you stop forcing and allow your nervous system to relax, everything changes. Your digestion improves, your immune system strengthens, and your creativity flourishes. You become more emotionally regulated, which makes you more pleasant to be around and better at handling life's challenges. The practice of non-forcing. Learning to stop forcing is a practice, not a destination. You don't just decide one day to stop forcing and then never do it again. You gradually become more aware of when you're forcing and gently redirect yourself toward allowing. Start by paying attention to the physical sensations of forcing. Notice when your shoulders are tight, when your jaw is clenched, when your breathing is shallow. These are your body's signals that you're pushing too hard. When you notice these sensations, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what would it look like to allow this situation instead of forcing it? Practice saying, I don't know, more often. When someone asks you a question and you don't immediately know the answer, resist the urge to force a response. Let yourself sit with not knowing. This creates space for genuine insight to emerge. Start small. Instead of forcing yourself to have a productive morning, allow yourself to move at your natural pace and see what happens. Instead of forcing a conversation to go a certain direction, let it unfold naturally. Instead of forcing yourself to feel grateful when you're sad, allow yourself to feel sad and notice what happens. Timing and natural rhythms. Everything in nature has its own timing. Flowers bloom when they're ready, not when you want them to. Fruit ripens in its own season. Animals mate when the conditions are right. Rivers flow around obstacles instead of trying to force through them. You're part of nature, which means you have your own natural rhythms and timing too. You have times when you're naturally more creative, more social, more energetic and more introspective. When you honor these rhythms instead of forcing yourself to be the same all the time, you become more effective and more satisfied. This applies to big life decisions too. Sometimes you're ready for a relationship, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're ready for a career change, and sometimes you need to stay put and learn more. Sometimes you're ready to have children, and sometimes you need more time to develop yourself first. When you stop forcing the timing of your life and start trusting that things unfold when they're supposed to, you stop living in a constant state of impatience. You can enjoy where you are now instead of always straining toward where you think you should be. The paradox of effort. Here's where it gets interesting. When you stop forcing, you often achieve more than when you were pushing so hard. This seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you understand how flow states work. Flow states are those magical moments when everything seems to happen effortlessly. You're completely absorbed in what you're doing, time seems to disappear, and you perform at your best. Athletes call this being in the zone. Artists call it inspiration. Whatever you call it, it only happens when you're not forcing. When you're in flow, you're working with your natural abilities instead of against them. You're focused but relaxed, engaged but not anxious. You're responsive to what's happening in the moment instead of rigidly following a predetermined plan. This is why the most successful people often talk about following their passion or doing what comes naturally. They've learned to identify their natural strengths and interests and build their lives around those instead of forcing themselves into ill-fitting roles. Decision-making without force. When you stop forcing decisions, you make better ones. Instead of agonizing over every choice and trying to figure out the right answer, you learn to sense what feels aligned for you. You pay attention to how different options feel in your body and choose the ones that create expansion rather than contraction. This doesn't mean you become impulsive or stop thinking things through. It means you use both your rational mind and your intuitive wisdom to make choices. You gather information, consider the consequences, and then check in with your deeper knowing about what's right for you. You also become more comfortable with making imperfect decisions and adjusting course as you go. Instead of trying to force the perfect choice, you make good enough decisions and stay open to changing direction when new information emerges. The ripple effect. When you stop forcing your own life, you stop trying to force other people's lives too. You become less controlling in your relationships, less pushy in your opinions, and less attached to being right. This makes you much more pleasant to be around and actually increases your influence because people are drawn to those who don't try to control them. Your children, if you have them, benefit enormously from your non-forcing approach. Instead of trying to make them into who you think they should be, you help them discover who they actually are. Instead of forcing them to follow your timeline, you support their natural development. Instead of forcing them to be happy all the time, you help them learn to navigate all their emotions. Your friends and family feel more relaxed around you because they don't feel like they have to perform or be anyone other than themselves. Your co-workers appreciate that you don't try to micromanage or force your ideas on them. Your romantic partner feels loved for who they are, not for who they could become. When life feels stuck, sometimes you might worry that if you stop forcing, nothing will happen. You might fear that you'll become lazy or complacent, that opportunities will pass you by, or that you'll never achieve your goals. These fears are understandable, but they're usually not accurate. What often happens when you stop forcing is that life becomes unstuck in ways you never expected. Opportunities show up that you couldn't have planned for. People enter your life who help you in ways you couldn't have imagined. Solutions to problems emerge that you couldn't have forced into existence. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means you take inspired action instead of forced action. You respond to opportunities when they arise instead of trying to create them out of thin air. You prepare yourself for possibilities instead of trying to control outcomes. The seasons of life. Just like nature has seasons, your life has seasons too. There are times for planting, times for growing, times for harvesting, and times for resting. When you stop forcing, you become better at recognizing which season you're in and responding appropriately. During planting seasons, you focus on learning new skills, meeting new people, and trying new things. You're not worried about immediate results because you understand that you're laying groundwork for future growth. During growing seasons, you tend to the seeds you've planted. You're patient with the process and trust that progress is happening, even when you can't see it. You don't try to force faster growth by pulling on the shoots. During harvest seasons, you enjoy the fruits of your earlier efforts. You celebrate your successes and share your abundance with others. You don't feel guilty about receiving what you've worked toward. During rest seasons, you allow yourself to be still and recharge. You don't force productivity or feel guilty about taking time to recover. You understand that rest is not laziness, but preparation for the next cycle of growth. Practical steps to stop forcing. The transition from forcing to allowing doesn't happen overnight, but there are practical steps you can take to begin this shift. Start your day without forcing a specific outcome. Instead of waking up with a rigid agenda, set an intention for how you want to feel and let your day unfold around that intention. Practice responding instead of reacting. When something unexpected happens, pause before jumping into fix-it mode. Ask yourself what this situation might be trying to teach you, or where it might be leading you. Pay attention to your language. Notice when you use words like should, must, have to, or need to. These often signal forcing. Try replacing them with phrases like I choose to, I prefer, or I would like to. Create space between impulse and action. When you feel the urge to force something, pause and take 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself what would happen if you didn't force this situation. What if you trusted it to unfold naturally? Practice saying no to things that don't feel aligned, even if they seem like good opportunities. Your time and energy are finite resources, and when you force yourself to do things that don't fit, you have less capacity for the things that do. Living in alignment. When you stop forcing life, you begin to live in alignment with who you really are. You make choices based on your authentic values rather than what you think you should want. You pursue goals that genuinely inspire you rather than ones that look impressive to others. This alignment creates a sense of ease and flow that's impossible to achieve through forcing. You still face challenges and obstacles, but you navigate them with more grace because you're not also fighting against yourself. You become more magnetic to the right opportunities, people, and experiences because you're no longer sending out the desperate energy of someone who's trying to make things happen. Instead, you're sending out the confident energy of someone who trusts that good things come to those who are ready to receive them. The ultimate freedom. Perhaps the greatest gift of stopping the force is the freedom it brings. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of pushing and striving. Freedom from the anxiety of trying to control uncontrollable things. Freedom from the disappointment of forced outcomes that don't satisfy you even when you achieve them. This freedom allows you to be present with what's actually happening in your life, instead of always living in the future moment when things will finally be how you want them. You can appreciate the journey instead of being solely focused on the destination. You realize that the life you were trying so hard to force into existence was actually preventing you from experiencing the life that was already available to you. When you stop forcing, you don't get a different life. You get the life you already have, but you're finally able to see and enjoy it. The most beautiful part is that this isn't a one-time transformation. Each time you choose allowing over forcing, you strengthen your ability to trust life's natural intelligence. You become more skilled at recognizing when you're pushing too hard and more practiced at relaxing into what is. Your life becomes an experiment in trust rather than a project to control, and in that trust you discover that life has been trying to give you everything you truly need all along. You just had to stop forcing long enough to receive it. When you finally understand that you don't have to force life to work, everything becomes possible. Not because you're controlling outcomes, but because you're finally in harmony with the way things actually work. And that harmony, that flow, that trust, that's where the real magic happens. The hidden cost of forcing. You might not realize how much forcing is costing you until you stop doing it. The price isn't just the obvious stress and exhaustion. It's all the opportunities you miss while you're busy trying to make the wrong things work. When you're forcing a relationship that isn't meant to be, you're not available for the one that is. When you're forcing a career path that drains you, you're not open to the work that would energize you. Forcing also costs you your natural intuition. Your body and mind are constantly giving you signals about what's working and what isn't. But when you're in force mode, you override these signals. You tell yourself you should be happy in a situation that makes you miserable. You convince yourself you want something that doesn't actually align with your values. Over time, you lose touch with your own inner guidance system. The social cost is equally significant. When you're forcing, you're not genuinely present with the people around you. You're too busy managing outcomes to really listen or connect. People can feel this energy, even if they can't name it. They sense that you're not fully there, that you're more interested in getting something from them than in simply being with them. The difference between intention and force. There's an important distinction between setting intentions and forcing outcomes. When you set an intention, you're clarifying what you want to create or experience, then you take aligned actions while staying open to how things unfold. When you force, you become attached to a specific outcome happening in a specific way within a specific time frame. Intention feels light and energizing. It gives you direction without making you rigid. You can hold an intention to find meaningful work while staying open to what form that work might take. You can intend to create a loving relationship while remaining curious about who might be the right person for you. Force feels heavy and constraining. It makes you tunnel-visioned and desperate. You become so focused on making one specific thing happen that you miss other possibilities. You force yourself to stay in situations that aren't working because you're attached to your original plan rather than what's actually unfolding. The key is learning to hold your desires lightly. You can want something deeply while still being willing to let it go if it's not meant for you. This paradox, caring without attachment, is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. How your environment reflects your internal state. When you're constantly forcing, your physical environment often reflects this internal chaos. Your home might be cluttered with projects you've started but never finished, clothes you never wear but think you should, and books you've bought but haven't read. Your schedule is packed with commitments that drain you but that you feel obligated to keep. As you learn to stop forcing, you naturally begin to simplify your external world too. You find yourself letting go of possessions that don't serve you, clearing out spaces that feel heavy, and creating environments that actually support your well-being. This isn't about following minimalism trends, it's about honoring what truly matters to you. Your digital environment changes too. You stop following social media accounts that make you feel bad about yourself. You unsubscribe from email lists that add stress to your day. You create boundaries around technology use that support your natural rhythms rather than fighting against them. The role of patience in non-forcing. Patience isn't passive waiting. It's active trust in the process of life. When you're patient, you're still engaged and responsive, but you're not trying to speed up natural timelines. You plant seeds and water them consistently, but you don't dig them up every day to check if they're growing. This kind of patience requires a fundamental shift in how you think about time. Instead of seeing time as something to be conquered or managed, you begin to see it as a natural force that has its own wisdom. Some things need time to develop properly. Relationships need time to deepen. Skills need time to develop. Healing needs time to occur. When you're patient, you can enjoy the process instead of just enduring it until you reach your goal. You can appreciate the learning that happens during the waiting periods. You can find meaning in the journey itself rather than just the destination. Financial abundance without force. Money is one of the areas where people force most aggressively, and it's also one of the areas where forcing backfires most dramatically. When you force financial outcomes, you often make decisions from scarcity and fear rather than wisdom and abundance. You take jobs that pay well but cost you your health. You invest in opportunities that feel wrong but promise quick returns. You spend money you don't have to maintain an image that isn't authentic. When you stop forcing with money, you begin to make financial decisions that align with your values and long-term well-being. You choose work that pays fairly for something you're genuinely good at, rather than trying to force yourself into high-paying roles that don't fit. You invest in things that make sense to you rather than following trends or pressure from others. You also develop a healthier relationship with money itself. Instead of seeing it as something to be hoarded or desperately pursued, you begin to see it as energy that flows through your life. You become generous when it feels natural and conservative when that's what's needed. You stop forcing yourself to spend money on things you don't want and stop forcing yourself to save money in ways that create stress. Parenting without force. If you're a parent, learning to stop forcing transforms not just your life, but your children's lives too. When you stop trying to force your children to be who you think they should be, they have space to discover who they actually are. When you stop forcing them to follow your timeline for development, they can unfold at their own pace. This doesn't mean you abandon structure or boundaries. Children need both to feel safe, but the structure comes from love and wisdom rather than control and fear. You create boundaries that protect your children while still honouring their individual nature. You guide them toward good choices while allowing them to learn from their mistakes. When you parent without forcing, you model for your children what it looks like to live authentically. They learn that they don't have to be perfect to be loved. They discover that their feelings are valid and that they can trust their own inner wisdom. They develop confidence in their ability to handle life's challenges because they've been allowed to practice in age-appropriate ways. The spiritual dimension of non-forcing. Many wisdom traditions speak about the importance of non-forcing, though they use different language. Buddhism talks about non-attachment. Taoism speaks of wu-wei, or effortless action. Christianity discusses surrendering to God's will. Islam emphasizes trusting in Allah's plan. These traditions recognize that fighting against the flow of life creates suffering. You don't need to adopt any particular spiritual belief to benefit from this wisdom. The principle applies whether you believe in God, the universe, nature, or simply the complex interconnectedness of life. The key insight is that there's an intelligence at work that's larger than your individual ego and plans. When you align with this larger intelligence, your actions become more effective and your life becomes more harmonious. You're still making choices and taking action, but you're doing so in partnership with life rather than in opposition to it. You become a participant in the unfolding of existence rather than someone trying to control it. Dealing with setbacks and challenges. Learning to stop forcing doesn't mean your life becomes problem-free. Challenges, setbacks, and disappointments are part of the human experience. The difference is in how you relate to these difficulties when they arise. When you were forcing, setbacks felt like personal failures or evidence that you weren't trying hard enough. You would either give up in despair or double down on your forcing, creating even more stress and resistance. When you learn to allow, setbacks become information. They tell you something about the situation, about timing, or about what needs to be adjusted. You develop resilience not by becoming tough and pushing through everything, but by becoming flexible and responsive. Like a tree that bends in the wind rather than breaking, you learn to adapt to changing circumstances while staying rooted in your core values and intentions. This flexibility extends to your relationship with failure itself. Instead of seeing failure as something to be avoided at all costs, you begin to see it as a natural part of learning and growth. You fail faster and recover more quickly because you're not so attached to being right or perfect. The transformation of ambition. When you stop forcing, your relationship with ambition changes dramatically. The desperate, grasping kind of ambition that drives you to achieve at any cost transforms into something more sustainable and fulfilling. You still want to grow and accomplish things, but your motivation comes from inspiration rather than desperation. Your goals become more authentic because they're based on what you actually want, rather than what you think you should want. You pursue achievements that align with your values and natural talents, rather than trying to force yourself to want things that look impressive, but don't actually fulfill you. You also become more patient with the process of achievement. Instead of needing everything to happen immediately, you can enjoy the journey of working towards something meaningful. You celebrate small progress and learn from setbacks without losing sight of your larger vision. Creating without force. Creativity flourishes when you stop forcing it. Whether you're writing, painting, cooking, decorating your home, or solving problems at work, the creative process works best when you create conditions that invite inspiration rather than demanding it. This means having creative practices that you engage in regularly, not because you're forcing yourself to produce something, but because the process itself nourishes you. You might write morning pages not to become a better writer, but to clear your mind. You might sketch, not to create art, but to observe the world more closely. When you do have creative projects you want to complete, you work on them consistently but gently. You show up regularly and do the work, but you don't force breakthrough moments or demand that every session be productive. You trust that creativity has its own rhythm and that your job is to be available when inspiration strikes. The ripple effect on society. When you stop forcing your own life, you contribute to creating a less forced world for everyone. Your example gives others permission to relax their own grip on control. Your presence becomes calming and reassuring, because people don't feel like they have to perform or be anything other than themselves around you. This is especially important in our current culture, which often glorifies hustle and grinding and forcing things to happen. When you demonstrate that it's possible to be successful and fulfilled without constantly pushing and striving, you offer an alternative way of being that others can learn from. Your non-forcing approach influences your workplace, your family, your community, and your friendships. You become someone who creates space for others to be authentic, who listens without trying to fix, and who collaborates without trying to control. These qualities are desperately needed in a world that often feels rushed and pressured. Integration and daily practice. The journey from forcing to allowing is not a linear path with a clear end point. It's an ongoing practice of awareness and choice. Some days you'll catch yourself forcing early and be able to redirect. Other days you might not notice until you're completely wound up in stress and control. The key is to be gentle with yourself during this process. Learning to stop forcing is itself something that can't be forced. You develop this capacity gradually through practice and patience with yourself. Each time you notice that you're forcing and choose to allow instead, you're strengthening new neural pathways and creating new habits. Start each day with a few minutes of stillness, whether that's meditation, prayer, or simply sitting quietly with your coffee. Set an intention for how you want to move through your day rather than just what you want to accomplish. Check in with yourself periodically to notice whether you're flowing or forcing. End your day with reflection. What moments felt easy and natural? What situations triggered your forcing response? What would you like to do differently tomorrow? This isn't about judgment or criticism. It's about learning and growth. Remember that stopping the force isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your dreams. It's about discovering a more effective and enjoyable way to create the life you want. When you work with life instead of against it, you often achieve more than you ever could through forcing, and you enjoy the process along the way. Life has been trying to support you all along. You just needed to stop fighting it long enough to feel that support. When you do, everything changes, not because you're controlling it, but because you're finally allowing yourself to receive what was always available to you.